We'll now take leaders' questions under Standing Order 36. Deputy Mary Lou MacDonald, please.
Unprecedented, dire, an exodus. Taoiseach, these are some of the words used to describe the chronic teacher shortage, the result of new research showing 800 vacant primary teaching posts across the state. And the situation is set to worsen, with vacancies expected to hit 1,200 in the near future. A staggering 66% of these vacancies are in the Greater Dublin area, and the impact is being felt disproportionately in poorer communities, with nearly half of disadvantaged schools reporting vacancies in permanent posts. The price is being paid by vulnerable children going far too long without the important supports that they need. Many schools have been forced to redeploy special education teachers to mainstream classes. The seeds of this problem were sown by the austerity cuts inflicted on teachers by yourselves and Fianna Fáil over a decade ago. And now this latest research underscores that the ability of teachers to build a good life has been hit hard by the housing crisis. On the watch of your government, house prices remain sky high, while rip-off rents continue to soar. Take here in Dublin, where the teacher shortage is most particularly acute. This year, the average selling price of a typical semi-D hit more than €500,000. The average rent in Dublin tops €2,300 a month, off-the-wall stuff. And this grim situation is, of course, reflected across the country. Teachers can't afford to rent or buy a home near their work, so they're voting with their feet and moving abroad to take advantage of opportunities that they are denied at home. Thousands of teachers say the only way they can move out of their parents' home is to emigrate. And as Minister Foley took the stage at the INTO Congress last April, delegates held signs up, held them aloft, which read, "Teachers can't afford the rent." And others read, "Build affordable and social housing." But clearly your government didn't get the message. You continue to miss the inadequate targets you set for affordable and social housing. You refuse to ban extortionate rent hikes. You refuse to provide the level of investment needed to tackle the scale of this housing emergency. Your party, Fine Gael, has been in power for 12 years, back to the hilt by Fianna Fáil for 7, and the housing crisis has gone from bad to worse. So change is now needed more than ever. Tonight, Sinn Féin brings before the Dáil our plan to fix the housing crisis by building genuinely affordable homes, cutting rents and banning rent increases. And I'm asking every deputy to back this motion and give a generation locked out of affordable housing the chance they deserve. Níl ach léirú ar an feib an gantanas imneach mún seoirí seo ar géir céim tíochta atá ag airí níos measa I rith an áma. Tá mún seoirí ag dul ar imachar mar nach bhfuil siad in ann teach ar phrais réasúnta a ceannach nó teach a cíosú gar dá obair. Caithfí an rialtas dul in lech leis an ngéir céim ar an buinte buise. Taoiseach, the dire shortage of teachers is down to a serious deterioration in the living standards of teachers, including, especially, their inability to put an affordable roof over their heads. So can you tell us, please, what action Minister Foley will take to address these teacher shortages, and will you tell us how government will address the housing needs of these teachers?
Thank you. Taoiseach,
thanks very much, Deputy, for raising this important issue. First of all, Government and the Minister for Education are very aware of shortages of teachers affecting many schools around the country. And we know that from time to time, too frequently, it means a special education teacher being assigned to a regular class, and that impacts negatively on the child with special education needs. So we understand that there is a very real issue here. It is important to see it against a backdrop in which the number of teaching posts has increased considerably. The pupil-teacher ratio, the staff-to-teacher ratio is as low as it's ever been and the number of teachers registered with the Teaching Council, far from having gone down, has in fact gone up in recent years, and has to be seen in the context of a country that is now experiencing full employment. And that is a great thing, a job for everyone who wants one. But of course can have negative consequences too. And it's not that staff shortages are unique to education, far from it. Talk to any employer anywhere in the country, they will tell you how difficult it is to recruit and retain staff. It's public sector, it's private sector, it's big business, it's small business, it's well-paid jobs, it's poorly paid jobs. And I think we wouldn't properly understand the problems that we face if that isn't understood and isn't fully acknowledged. In terms of pay and conditions for public servants such as teachers, they are negotiated between unions and government. We have a pay deal. It was voted for by teachers in good numbers and was implemented and resulted in a pay rise most recently in October. Negotiations will begin in the next couple of weeks with public sector unions around the next round of pay increases, and I'm confident that we'll come to an agreement, and that will go to ballot of public servants, including teachers, as soon as an agreement can be made. When it comes to the housing situation, the housing shortage more generally, this is a government that is making real progress, Deputy. I know you will struggle to acknowledge it, but nobody can deny the facts that we're seeing on the ground. The new homes and apartments being built all over the country. Just look at the numbers. In the past 12 months, numbers suggesting 30,000 or more new homes being built. That is 50% more than when this government came to office, more than double when I became Taoiseach in 2017, 4 times the number being built than when my party came to office in 2011. You can only ramp up house building so quickly, unless you don't want to build houses properly. But if you want to build houses and apartments properly, you can only ramp it up so quickly. It's quadrupled since 2011, up 50% since this government came to office, and will go higher again next year. And what is particularly encouraging, Deputy, is to see a huge increase in the number of first-time buyers. Over 500 first-time buyers a week now drawing down their mortgage. And of course the real figure is much higher because we count couples as one when we look at those numbers. Haven't seen that in 16 years, Deputy. And my concern with your party is you want to roll the clock back on that. You want to take away the help that we're providing for first-time buyers, like those young teachers you mentioned. Most of them want to buy. They don't want to have to rent for too long. And you want to take that help away. You want to take away the first-time buyers grant. You want to take away First Home. You want to take away so much help that's out there now for first-time buyers. They will be worse off under Sinn Féin. And I think that's clear to anyone who looks at the facts.
Deputy MacDonald.
We don't want to do that at all, Taoiseach. What I would like you to do is for you to answer the question that I put to you. So we currently have 800 vacant posts in primary schools. That's set to hit 1,200. That's a problem. I think we can agree. The teaching union is telling us very directly that this is related to housing, to the fact that teachers cannot afford to rent or buy a home close to where they work. And I've asked you what you're going to do about that. Your views on Sinn Féin are a matter for yourself, but they're not addressing this question. The teachers don't really care about that. They want to know what is going to happen to make it possible for a young teacher to take up these posts and ensure that children get the education that they need. And you have come back with zilch. And really, in the end, that's the problem with this whole housing debate. We're talking about teachers, we could talk about nurses, and we could talk about the whole economy, but we're talking about the teaching profession here. And when it comes right down to it, despite the evidence of failure, because everything that you've done there, that you've recited, it's half what's needed. So despite the evidence of failure, you can't seem to accept even that there is a problem, much less offer solutions. But let me put the question again. What are you going to do, and what will Minister Foley do on these shortages and to make homes available for these teachers?
Thanks, Deputy. To answer your question, 3 things. A new pay deal which we'll negotiate with teachers and public servants in the next few weeks. Building more than 30,000 new homes this year, not objecting to them in the way that your party and your reps do. And also increasing the rent credit to €750 a year per renter. 1,500 for a couple. More than that if there's more than 2 people sharing. But Count Corl, I wish to put on the record of the House that the Deputy the leader of Sinn Féin misled the House. She said that she did not want to take away Help to Buy. She said she did not want to take away First Home. It is Sinn Féin policy to remove the help that this government is giving first-time buyers. She wants to make it harder for first-time buyers to buy their first home, and everybody needs to know that.
Thank you very much. Now, please, can we have a little order? Deputy Holly Kearns, please.
Taoiseach, today marks the 1-month anniversary of the brutal Hamas attack on Israel, in which 1,400 people were killed, 1,000 were injured, and at least 243 people were kidnapped. We now know an Irish-Israeli girl, 8-year-old Emily Hand, is among those who were kidnapped. I know everyone in this House is hoping for Emily's safe return, and indeed for the safe and swift return of all hostages. Taoiseach, Israel has a right to defend itself from attack, but what's happening in Gaza is not a defence, it's an annihilation. The entire strip is being reduced to death and dust. The scale of the devastation is unprecedented. Nowhere is safe. UN schools, hospitals, media centres, bakeries and residential buildings have all been deliberately targeted by Israeli missiles. More than 10,000 people have been killed in just a month, including more than 4,000 children, 89 UN workers and 39 journalists. 1.5 million people have been displaced. More than 2 million people are being denied the essentials to sustain life: food, water and fuel. The ambivalent response of the international community to this litany of war crimes is shameful. The UN Security Council is toothless, the UN General Assembly is powerless, and the EU is rudderless. Ireland is one of only a small number of countries in the West which has even condemned Israel's multiple breaches of international law. Taoiseach, words of condemnation are important, but they're not enough. Words must be followed by action. In this country, enacting the illegal Israeli settlement divestment bill is now a matter of urgency. The EU must also act. The EU is Israel's largest trading partner, with trade between the two amounting to more than 46 billion. Trade is governed by the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which has an essential elements human rights clause in it. This means that either side can unilaterally suspend the agreement in response to serious breaches of human rights. Taoiseach, if Israel's destruction in Gaza isn't sufficient to trigger that clause now, then nothing ever will. Israel is also a participant in Horizon Europe, where Israeli institutions can apply for funding under this 95 billion research and innovation scheme. Access to that lucrative programme should also be immediately suspended. Taoiseach, you've publicly stated Israel is breaching international law. This is not just a violation of its human rights obligations, it is a clear contravention of its trade deal with the EU. There must be consequences for that. So, Taoiseach, I have 3 questions. Do you agree that the EU's trade deal with Israel should be suspended until Israel complies with international law? Do you agree Israel's participation in Horizon Europe should also be suspended on similar terms? And will you enact the illegal Israeli settlements divestment bill as a matter of urgency?
Taoiseach, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy. Ireland condemns the attack by Hamas and other militant groups on Israel and the devastating loss of life that is caused. Attacks on civilians and the taking of hostages is always wrong. Israel's right to defend itself, indeed its obligation to defend itself, must be exercised within the parameters of international humanitarian law. And all parties in all conflicts must abide by international humanitarian law. Its aim is to protect civilians everywhere. It applies in all conflicts, in all circumstances, to state and to non-state actors alike. The situation in Gaza is now critical. It is a deepening humanitarian crisis, and the high number of civilian casualties, particularly children, is deeply shocking. The protection of civilians and de-escalation must be the priority, which is why Ireland has called for a humanitarian ceasefire to allow hostages to be released, to allow foreign passport holders to leave, and to allow humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip. And we're engaging with the European Union, the United Nations and our regional partners to try to achieve this, and in all cases we're calling for de-escalation. In relation to trade deals such as the EU trade agreement with Israel and also Horizon, these are matters that are European competences on which Ireland can't and should not act alone. These are issues that we have to discuss at European level and can only possibly be agreed at European level. And the truth is there is a very significant divergence of opinion within the European Union. While we were able to agree a common statement in Brussels last week, and we all stand by that, the truth is there are very different views, and very different member states come from very different perspectives on this, and that needs to be understood. Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, coming from a particular perspective, other countries that have experienced serious terrorist attacks at the hands of other Islamic resistance movements, also have a particular perspective on it, and we have a particular perspective on it. It is a good thing that we're a member of the European Union for so many different reasons, because we have a seat at the table, and we do have a say when decisions are being made. But the position that we're at European level now is nowhere near taking actions of that nature against Israel. What we're trying to do is use our seat at the EU table to recentre and rebalance the EU position, to particularly bring the EU to a position where we're calling for a humanitarian ceasefire so that the hostages can be released, so that foreign passport holders can get out, so that the killing stops, and so the humanitarian aid can get in.
Taoiseach, Israel is committing blatant abuses of international law every single second in Gaza. Palestinian civilians are trapped in the world's largest open-air prison, a prison that their jailer is indiscriminately dropping bombs on. More than 25,000 tonnes of explosives have been dropped in Gaza in the past month. And when a missile strikes and buildings collapse, there's no fuel or machinery or anything to dig out the men, women and children who are buried under the rubble. The people who survived the initial strikes are slowly dying under mountains of rubble. The stench of death is everywhere in Gaza, and still the bombs rain down. And I think we all know that Netanyahu's far-right government has no intention of stopping this. So, Taoiseach, we must do whatever we can to stop this massacre. That means using every means at our disposal to exert whatever influence we can. And I know that around the Israel-EU trade agreement that would happen at an EU level, but that's why I'm raising it with you, to see if you'd raise it at the next European Council meeting to request suspension of Israel's trade deal with the EU on the basis of their breach of the clear and unambiguous human rights clause in that agreement. And then that's at an EU level. At a national level, we could introduce the illegal divestment bill, the illegal Israeli divestment bill. So there are several things you could do.
Thank you.
Given what's going on, would you please address those two particular issues in your reply?
Thanks, Deputy. We will do all that we can as a country to try to bring an end to this conflict and to try to ensure that there is peace with justice, so that both Israelis and Palestinians can live in secure and viable states. But we are so far away from that at the moment, and the priority now has to be a humanitarian ceasefire so that hostages can be released, so that foreign citizens can leave, so that we can get humanitarian aid in, and most of all so that the killing can stop. We're using our influence at EU level and UN level to do the best we can to secure that. We've also significantly increased our contribution in terms of humanitarian aid to Palestine. And as I say, when it comes to any kind of trade issues, they're European competence, not something that we can act on, nor should we act on alone. And the EU position has evolved in the past couple of weeks, and I hope it will evolve again. But the main thing we need to get the EU behind, and is not yet behind, is the call for a humanitarian ceasefire, and that'll be what we'll be pushing at the next meeting of the European Council.
Deputy Noel Grealish on behalf of the regional group.
Good morning, Clancarla. First of all, could I offer, and that of my regional group colleagues, our condolences to Deputy Fiona Murphy, whose father passed away suddenly this morning, Patrick, and may his gentle soul rest in peace. Taoiseach, 4 out of 5 burglars released from prison in Ireland go on to re-offend within a short period of time, more than half of them within a year of their release. It's the same with people jailed for public order offences. Again, 4 out of 5 of them are back before the courts within 3 years of they being released. Their victims, the very people they robbed from and whose lives they have seriously disrupted, have to pay for these criminals to get a proper defence, as does every other law-abiding taxpayer in this country. Last year, the bill to the taxpayer providing free legal aid in criminal cases was more than €76 million. In the last 7 years, we've paid out in excess of €450 million in free legal aid. A large portion of this money is being spent on defending the indefensible. People who have no regard for the law or the consequences of their actions, who have broken the law countless times, and they know that every time that they are actually caught, they will get the best defence in court without it costing them one red cent. In the past, when I raised the issue of withholding free legal aid to persistent offenders who have broken the law countless times, I've been informed that this would be constitutionally impossible. In that case, we should change the law so that these repeat offenders, often with hundreds of convictions behind them, must over a period of time at least repay the cost of providing that legal aid. That is to say that we should be deducting from the pay they get from their employers until the debt is repaid. In the case of those drawing social welfare, the same should be done. A certain amount of money should be withheld from their weekly payments. Hit them where it hurts is the only way that I can see it making these repeat offenders think twice. They're making a mockery of the law, and there's never any compensation for the victim of their crimes. Then if they get caught, it's the taxpayer, including the very people that they have victimised, who have to pay for them to be defended in court. Taoiseach, the current legislation programme includes a new criminal justice legal aid bill, under which is proposed to update and strengthen the system of granting criminal legal aid. Taoiseach, will you commit to include in that legislation changes that will require defendants with a record of persistent offending to be forced to pay back the cost of free legal aid provided to them?
Thank you, Deputy Grealish. Taoiseach, please.
Just want to thank the Deputy for raising this important matter, and to join with him in offering my condolences to Deputy Verona Murphy. Hadn't heard about her father passing on, and obviously all our thoughts are with her today. Want to thank Deputy Grealish for raising this issue. I know it's a matter of enormous annoyance to people, that people who have multiple convictions, who have a history of recidivism, get legal aid paid for by the state, which is of course paid for by the taxpayer. And I know that frustrates a lot of people who I meet regularly would raise this issue, the frustration in seeing people committing crimes on bail, and the frustration in seeing people who have a long criminal record having their solicitor and barrister paid for by the taxpayer. So I understand where the Deputy is coming from. But we do have a constitution, and we do operate on the basis that people are innocent until proven guilty. And even if somebody has been found guilty twice or three times, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're guilty every time. And that is the principle that we have. Presumption of innocence until proven guilty. And as has been said centuries ago, and I agree with this, better that 2 or 3 guilty men should go free than one innocent man be convicted unfairly or inappropriately. But I think one thing the Deputy has touched on is the possibility of recouping some of the cost from people who have been convicted. So not making the presumption that they may or may not be guilty, but if they receive legal aid or subsequently found guilty, could some of the costs be recouped? And I think that's definitely an idea worth exploring in the context of the criminal legal aid bill. So I'll certainly raise that with the AG and the Minister for Justice and see if it's possible.
Taoiseach, Deputy Grealish.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Taoiseach, I know that under the new bill, somebody applying for free legal aid may be asked to contribute towards the cost of their defence if the legal aid board decides that they can afford it, but I feel that too many of repeat offenders I'm talking about will be well capable of hiding their ill-gotten gains. I would like to see the bill requiring those persistent criminals with a certain number of convictions behind them to repay the costs of their defence over time, whether from wages or future social welfare payments. The principle of deducting a portion of social welfare payments is already established in the case of overpayments, with up to 15% taken from the personal weekly rate until the money is paid back. back. This should also be done for the defence costs of serial offenders. The taxpayer should no longer have to suffer the indignity of paying out hard-earned money for the free legal aid. The laws governing the allocation of free legal aid to persistent offenders simply has to change, and change radically, Taoiseach.
Taoiseach, please.
Work to modernise and improve the operation of the Criminal Legal Aid Scheme is underway as part of the Criminal Legal Aid Bill, which is currently being drafted. It's intended that as part of this modernisation, the Criminal Legal Aid Bill will update the court application and eligibility process, and in appropriate cases, the applicant may be subject to an assessment of means. Following this assessment, the Legal Aid Board will be able to recommend to the court that the applicant can make a contribution to the cost of providing legal aid. However, the Constitution obliges that the state provide an accused person with the means to obtain appropriate legal representation, and the European Convention on Human Rights also provides that every person charged with a criminal offence is entitled to defend themselves in person or through legal assistance of their own choosing, or if they've insufficient means to pay for legal assistance, to be given it free when the interests of justice so require. And the Criminal Legal Aid Scheme therefore must operate with due regard to these rights.
Thank you very much, Taoiseach. Now, our son on Grúpa Neamhspleách and Seachta Catherine Connolly led the whole.
Tá mise chun fille an ábhar Gaza agus an tár atá ar siúl faoi láthair a thosaí bliain mí ó hin an lá seo a chur Hamas tús leis nuair a maraíodh 1,400 duine agus tá sé cainte go láidir agam. Ach inis tá Israel I leanat a rai ar feadh mísa agus á dhéanamh acu. Tá sé ráite ag Anthony Guterres gur ab ionan Gaza agus relic do gasúr. Tá poiste beag búchal nó calín ag fáil bás cuile jet nómid. Dar le Guterres an tromlí atá ag tarlú I Gaza is géircéim déanú le ach níos measa fós is géircéim don cinenne déine na himplachtaí atá ag baint leis an rud atá ag tarlú. Taoiseach, I want to praise you for leadership in calling out what's happening in relation to Israel. It was a little belated, but it has happened, and you have done that, and you've shown leadership in a time where it's needed, but we need to do a lot more. I'm standing here today, a month after the slaughter of 1,400 Palestinians, which I'm on record for condemning. I'm equally on record for condemning what Israel has done, totally against international law, disproportionate, and just not acceptable on any level. Every 10 minutes a child dies. In a month we have lost 4,237 children. One child every 10 minutes. That's not self-defence. That's not a defence army. That's a warmongering army. We have lost 10,328 Palestinians in total. 37 journalists, 89 employees with UNRWA, and approximately 25,408 people injured, not to mention 1.5 million displaced and so on. Indiscriminate bombing of civilians, homes, hospitals, refugee camps, schools, entirely against international humanitarian law. Secretary General of the United States has said that Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. He said the nightmare for Gaza is more than a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis of humanity. I am asking today that we use our voice. We cannot wait for Europe to mature. We cannot wait for them to get their act together. We need to use our voices to call for an immediate ceasefire, to stop the indiscriminate bombing of civilians' hospital houses. In destroying Hamas, they're destroying Gaza and the Palestinian people. On what level is that acceptable, Taoiseach? I am asking you, for all of us here, to stand together and make it clear to Israel that we are not behind this. We will not support them. There are many things that can be done. Deputy Cairns has already outlined in relation to the association, the trade association. That's something you can immediately look at. There's also a resolution under the UN that you can look at.
Thank you, Deputy.
Just want to thank Deputy Connolly for raising this issue again and to recognise her long-standing interest in the political situation in the Middle East. And I think all of us watching what we see on our TV news or on social media every day just can't be struck by the number of children who are being killed, often pretty thin, malnourished children for other reasons, the number of journalists who have been killed, and also the number of UN aid workers who have been killed. And these are real heroes, aid workers who stayed behind in Gaza and not just risked their lives but lost their lives too. And they're real heroes in my view. And I have enormous fears. How long is this going to go on? How is this going to end? Will there be an escalation involving perhaps Hezbollah, Lebanon, other countries, other groups around the world? I have great fears of that. And also, when the war in Gaza is over, who's going to run Gaza and who's going to rebuild it? And I'm not sure anyone has answers to these questions. And that really makes me very concerned about the road the world is currently on. And I know Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, promised mighty vengeance. His words, not mine, mighty vengeance. But that should perhaps be, is valid, I think, when it comes to Hamas, the terrorists who killed those 1,400 people in Israel. It's not when it comes to Palestinian civilians, and far too many have been killed already in this conflict, in my view. And certainly Ireland is using our voice. I'm working hard on this to the whole government, at EU level, at UN level. We've increased our aid budget for Palestine, for Gaza, money given to the UN, and also using our voice at the UN and at EU level and in bilateral engagements to press for what is now needed urgently, which is a humanitarian ceasefire, so that we can get aid in, so that hostages can be released, and Hamas should release the hostages without any equivocation, and so that EU and other citizens are allowed to leave.
Deputy Connolly.
While I praise you for your initiative and your leadership, we stood idly by for a long time in relation to Israel. And we are complicit in that. When Amnesty released the report in February 22, no response from the government in relation to Israel operating an apartheid regime. There are many, many examples when the 6 human rights organisations were designated as terrorist organisations. Other than a condemnation and concerns, we did nothing. When the refugee camp in Jenin was attacked, we did nothing other than concerns and condemnation. There are things we can do. When the the investments bill was brought before us, you went for a pregnancy 9-month adjournment rather than actually grasping with it and dealing with it and doing something practical. The same thing with the illegal occupation bill, that the title just escapes me. And let me read from Amnesty, just to finish on Amnesty, if the Cancor allows me. When the Amnesty report came out, nearly 2 years ago, the scale and seriousness of the violations documented in our report make it clear that the international community must drastically change its report. Through its failure to take any meaningful action to hold Israel to account for its systematic and widespread violations and crimes under international law against the Palestinian population, the international community, including Ireland, has contributed to undermining the international legal order and has emboldened Israel to continue perpetrating these crimes with impunity. Apartheid is a crime against humanity, and the international community has an obligation to hold the perpetrators to account.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks, Deputy. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that is a fair assessment of Ireland's position down the years. And I know in the engagement that I've had with the Palestinian Authority, and President Abbas, for example, who I met some years ago, there was a very strong acknowledgement from the Palestinian Authority and Palestinians in general that Irish governments consistently for decades now have been supportive of their cause and their desire to have a state of their own within secure and viable borders. And I think that is recognised. And I know when we were campaigning for our seat on the UN Security Council, the one that we won, there was a very strong sense from Arab countries that Ireland was one of those countries in the European Union, in the West, that listened to their concerns and took a balanced position on these matters. And I know Minister Bryan, for example, has met with some of the groups that you've mentioned and has engaged with them. And I think we've even provided funding for some of those bodies that have been delisted. When it comes to trade, trade is an EU competence, and we can only act on a multilateral level when it comes to something that is very clearly an EU issue. On the divestment bill, there's a timed amendment there. We need to give it consideration. We have to bear in mind the consequences of singling out one country out of 200. Other countries have questions to answer as well, and we'd have to give that careful consideration too.
Thank you. That concludes Leaders' questions.